My name is Ilya Birman. I'm a designer. I design things like the user interfaces for applications for iPhone, for Windows, for iPad, for all kinds of platforms. And I've been working for Bureau Gorbunov for many years, where we also did many design-related stuff. And also, I recently helped 500 Tech design the new user interface for Mimic. I don't know if anyone has already tried Mimic. Does anyone know this thing? Can you raise your hand? Okay, just several people. So this is a tool for the web developers to mimic the server responses. So when you're developing a front end of your application and you need something from the back end, but it's not ready yet, or it's unavailable now, or something is wrong with it, you can just mock the responses in this tool. It's like a tool in the browser, and everything behaves like the server is there, and you can continue developing your application. And so I helped design the UI for it, and I encourage you all to try it, maybe in a break or sometime, and let us know what you think, because we want to make it very comfortable to use. So, yeah, and you can go to mimic.js.org to learn more about it. So my talk is called Feedback First, and it's about the user interface design. And I will start with an example. So let's say you come to a friend's place and you ring the bell and you wasn't sure if it worked, so you didn't hear it. So you ring again. Now you try to listen carefully to make sure it really worked, but you still can't hear it. So just in case, you press for the third time really firmly, and then your friend opens the door and they say, "Hey, why are you ringing so much?" Right? So what happens there is you don't get the feedback, so you don't know whether it's worked or not. So you continue pressing, and at some point you maybe come to the conclusion that it doesn't work. So if we get to the user interface, imagine you have a website or some kind of online store with a buy button, and when the user presses this button, what happens is the item gets added to a cart, and so now it's in the cart. But how does the user know this? So if nothing happens besides just this button pressing, the user would probably think that it didn't work. Maybe they will try to press it again. Again, maybe they will try to press it 3 times. But at some point, they will decide that it is not working, even though it does work, and they will go away. So you probably should provide some feedback to somehow communicate to the user that it has worked, maybe by adding a text label, or maybe by playing some fancy animation, or doing just anything that could help the user understand that it has worked. Also, imagine a reverse situation. So for example, something has broke in the back end of your application, and for some reason, the item was not actually added to cart. So I don't know why. But the front end still worked as if the back end also worked. So you displayed this message to the user, even though the item was not actually added to cart. From the user's point of view, the item was added to cart. They would not even know that it was not until they encounter some problem in the future. So from the user's perspective, feedback is the only thing that matters. It's the only thing that actually communicates to them whether your app is working or not. So if you provide feedback from the user's perspective, it what makes them think that your application works. And so if you want to make your user think that your application works great, you think, okay, I've mixed up some slides. So I forgot to say that feedback is something that is implemented in code. So it's not something you could just take from the designer as a mock-up and just use. You have to code it. So that's why we decided that it would be a good idea to share some of these ideas here on a developers conference. So if you want your user to feel that your application works great, you should provide great feedback. And this starts with little details, like when you have a link and the user hovers over it, it would change the cursor and it would change the link's color to communicate to the user that it actually is working. You know that if you're using a terminal and you start entering your password, it doesn't show up in any way. And since you're developers, you encountered it many times in your life, you're used to it, but when you see it for the first or the second time, it's really confusing, you're not sure whether it's working, and even if you know how it works, it still doesn't feel right. it still feels like maybe it's not interpreting my input. So if you enter a password in a window like this, then it feels much better because every time you enter a character, it appears as this black dot on the screen. And so these black dots are not there to hide your password, because to hide your password, you could just not show it. They're there to show that the input is being interpreted and dealt with. Another example would be when you drag a file to the Finder window, this blue outline appears around the folder where it's going to fall. So again, this helps you understand that it will work, that when you release the mouse button, the file will be moved to that folder. So all these details is how the user understands that it works. And if you want the user to feel that it works great, you need to provide great feedback. And I will cover just 3 qualities of good feedback, which are instant, gentle, and continuous. There's a lot more to be said about feedback. It's a huge topic in the user interface, but here I have just a small slot of time, so I have to cover the most important ones. So we'll start with instant. So it means what it says. So you want your feedback to be instant. The moment the user presses a button, the moment the user does something, you should provide feedback as fast as possible. And for the user, it should feel like it's happened immediately at the moment when they did something. So for example, if I press this red button to close the window will disappear that very moment. And this is rather easy to do. It's usually not a hard work to close the window. Sometimes the work you have to do takes time, and so you would probably provide some progress bar. It may come with animation. This one is from Windows 95. I will have some other historical examples here. So, and this is also rather obvious. You know, if your operation takes a minute or maybe an hour, you will provide this kind of animation to communicate to the user that the command was taken and is now being worked on. But let's get back to this example where you're adding something to cart. This is not something that will take a minute or an hour. This will probably take a second or 2, maybe 3 on the very slow internet. So painting a whole progress bar will be not an appropriate solution here. And in some places, you will see that nothing happens for this 1 or 2 seconds. And then when finally the item gets added to cart, some message appears. And this is bad. So this feedback is not instant. So the moment when the user presses the button, you want to do something, maybe show a text label that will then change to this added message. So something has to happen that very moment, otherwise the user would continue to press the button or will just think that your application is not responding. Sometimes you have to come up with different solutions to make the user understand that their command was actually heard. So again, in the old days, you know, all the applications had these splash screens, so it could take maybe 15 or 20 seconds for Word to start on Windows 3.1. And so when you click the Windows icon, it would show the splash screen, and then it will be replaced with the actual UI. So this splash screen there is not to just advertise the program, but to let the user know that it's being worked on and that they have to wait. So this was instant. Number 2 is gentle. So sometimes the feedback is there to show the user that something has gone wrong. Maybe you display some error message. And you want the feedback to be there, but you don't want it to be too much. And sometimes when the user makes mistakes, you can show them an alert like this. And this is really bad, because it feels like you're being slapped on the face for just having a mistake in the form. This is not a good user experience. So you don't want this alert to be there. You probably would want to show the error message just in line in the form. But this one is also bad. Even though it shows the error message inside, it does so much stuff. It shows this frame around the input. It changes the color of the input to pink. It adds this text which says illegal characters found, which makes no sense in the human world. Why are they illegal? Is it against the law to put these characters? What does it even mean? What are legal characters? So this text is stupid, and there is an X. There's so many things that try to communicate to the user that they have made a mistake, and probably just one of them would be enough. And sometimes you can just make do with even simpler things. So you know this thing when the user makes mistake in a password, you can just shake the form to let them know that it was not accepted, and you don't need to show any error message. And the cursor stays in the input, so they don't need to refocus it, so it feels much nicer. So you want to be gentle. And by the way, I want also to highlight what happens when you press sign in. You may notice that this animation right next to the button appears right when you press, so that the user understands that their password is being analyzed or whatever. Now let's look at this guy. So I told you that progress indicators is one way to show that your operation takes time, and they make sense when it takes a considerable amount of time. When it requires shorter time, you may just show this kind of animation, but even this can be too much. So this has been showing here for several seconds, and I think many of you already feel like this presentation is taking too much time, right? So this is very slow. Like whenever you see this animation, this communicates to the user that your application is being slow. And that's not what you probably want to communicate to your user. So sometimes when some operation takes just 1 or 2 seconds, you can skip this one and do something else. You can show something that is not real content of your application, but maybe fake content. That's what Facebook and Instagram do. So Facebook shows these silhouettes of the post that will appear in a couple of seconds. Instagram shows these blurry images. And so you see these for a couple of seconds, and then the real ones appear, and it all feels a little bit faster, a little bit more responsive, even though it takes the same amount of time to actually download the data. And again, I'd like to look at some historical examples, because on the older hardware, which was very slow, with the older networks, which were very slow, people had to come up with very different solutions to these problems. And this is what happened when you launched an application on the very first iPhone. By the way, how many of you had the first iPhone? No, not a lot. Well, a couple of you. So when you launched the application on the very first iPhone, here's what happened. So for the first second or two, there was this animation with the application that showed nothing. And then when the application was actually loaded, the data appeared. And so this thing was actually a PNG image which came with every application. It was called default PNG. If you had your own application in the Apple's App Store, you had to ship this image with the app, so that the operating system could show this animation from nothing to full screen before it has the application loaded, so that for the user, it feels like the application loads instantly. And so while the user gets familiar with the interface, the application appears and it looks like it's just loaded instantly. So fake data is your friend in these situations. Always think about how you can show something that is almost true or resembles what's true, and this will make your application feel snappier. So this is about gentle, so don't do too much, right? And the third one is continuous. So you want your feedback to be continuous. And let's look at this slider. So here, the user changes some value with the slider, and when they release their mouse button, you will see that the value changes in the box to the right. And it happens instantly, right? So the moment the user releases their mouse button, the value changes. But instant is not enough here, because it still feels slow. Imagine if you have a volume knob on your music player, which would change the volume only after you take your hand off the knob, or even worse, imagine a car that would turn only after you take your hands off the steering wheel. You wouldn't want to drive this one, right? So instead of being just instant, you have to provide continuous feedback. The value to the right should change all the time during the change in the position of the slider on the left. And again, sometimes you just can't do it this fast. Sometimes you need some time to calculate the value or to download some data over the network. And so you cannot provide this smooth, continuous feedback. And so in the worst implementations of this slider, you will see something like this. You see, the slider updates only when the data becomes available. And it is even painful to watch, and it is even more painful to use. So instead of doing this, you should at least make the slider itself responsive, so it should change continuously during the drag, and the value to the right, well, if it needs time to update, okay, let it be. But again, you should consider updating it at least partially, showing continuously at least something that will be continuous. So if you look at Google Maps and you try to zoom it in very quickly, you will notice that it zooms in continuously while you move your fingers through the scrolling on your trackpad. But at some moment you will see something like this, right? A very blurry map, and in a second or two it will become sharp. So this is what they do to make this feedback continuous, so that when you zoom in or out the map, it all just moves slowly or fastly, depending on how you move your fingers, in direct relationship to the motion of your fingers. And again, I want to show you some of the examples of the past where the hardware was really, really slow. This is Windows 3.1, and the computers were so slow at that time that they couldn't repaint the windows as you dragged them over the desktop. So what they had to do is they repainted only the frame of the window. So when you dragged the window, only this frame was moving and the window stayed where it was. And then the window would repaint in the new position when you released your mouse button. And there is another detail that I like particularly. If you notice, the top part of the frame, you will see some red pixels over the notebook and some blue pixels over the phone. So this frame is actually drawn with the inverted pixels. So because they wanted to save memory, they didn't want to save the actual data behind the pixels that they were obscuring by this frame. So they just inverted the pixels. And so when you moved for another place, they could invert them again, and the picture would be the same as it was before. So people had to be really, really creative to make this continuous and nice feedback. So these are 3 things, and just to sum it up, great feedback is what makes the user think that your application works great. It is not about saying you make your applications work faster, because this is obvious. All developers spend a considerable amount of time making their applications faster, but this is not about just being faster. Sometimes you can't be as fast as the user wants, so please consider doing something to at least provide this nice continuous feedback so that it feels very fast. So these are 3 things that I think are most important. You want to be gentle, instant, gentle, and continuous. And again, fake data is your friend. Sometimes you cannot do things very fast. Come up with something that you can do very fast. Fake posts on Facebook, default PNG on the iPhone, just the frame around the window in Windows 3.1. It's all very good because it changes the experience dramatically and makes all the difference in the world. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions, and maybe you want to show something or discuss some of the user interface of your application, I'll be happy to talk with you somewhere. Or near? Sorry, are we supposed to have questions now, or? Oh, okay, great. So go ahead. Okay. So the question is, how do we use existing components like the ones from Bootstrap or Material or somewhere else if they are not exactly like I've shown you? Well, there is no law that says that you have to use Bootstrap or something. So you choose your tools and you choose the ones that fit your job better. For some tasks, it may make sense to use some of these frameworks because it makes the development time or cost lower, and this is more important for you than just doing this. For some tasks, the user experience is more important, and you may want to take more time working on that. Maybe some of them are good already, so I cannot tell you just always good. Always do the best user interface you can, because sometimes it just isn't worth the cost. So I'm just showing you some of the things that you have to consider, and the tools you choose is up to you. Anything else? All right then. Thank you again.